Hello, everyone. I hope everyone had a fantastic weekend, couple days off in between classes here. Last week, we had a long week, basically covering everything from radio communications, radio navigation, and then we basically concluded, yet did not finish, the aviation weather section. So we're definitely going to go ahead and pick up where we left off. So we'll start to move on to the practical side first before we get to today's material. We are 75% of the way done with the class. This is our very last week. It's amazing how fast time flies as we're pushing through this stuff. As a reminder, we do have moderators on the platform, so if you have any questions, as always, regarding either the class or the topics at hand, please feel free to ask in the chat, and we'll do our best to get back to you. In addition to that, we still have some FAA test questions that we're going to be covering over the next today and also the rest of the week as well. So remember, please use the vote function. So when an FAA test question actually appears, we'll have it typically on a slide. There is the blue vote button on the lower right-hand corner, which will become available once the test question is basically up in front of you. So please remember to answer there and not in the chat. Don't give away the potential right or wrong answer to your fellow students. Do appreciate that. Everybody's been doing really, really well on that anyways. All right, so let's go ahead and see what is on the agenda for today. As I said, we're going to go ahead and finish our aviation weather lesson. We still have some more practical stuff to cover, METARs, TAFs. We're also going to look at SIGMETs, AirMets, PIREPs, and that'll basically wrap up the aviation weather section. If you had an opportunity to take the quiz over the weekend and give it that college shot, that's perfectly fine. If you waited until we covered the last little bit here, that's perfectly fine as well. I would encourage you to take the aviation weather one a couple times just because there's a lot of different questions that appear here. And this is kind of just the surface, as I said before. If you are interested in aviation weather, you'll start to learn more about it, the different theories, and also a lot of the other different weather products. Remember, we're only kind of teaching you guys about 10 different weather products. The reality is there's over 200 that are available to us as pilots. You'll actually learn more about those as you go up the food chain and actually, become an instrument pilot or commercial pilot and so forth. So class number 10, these are our last 3 lessons here. After we finish the aviation weather lesson, I'm going to say that might take the first hour. We're going to switch gears and start talking about aircraft performance. So we're going to be talking about the POH and the AFM, the Pilot's Operating Handbook, and the Approved Flight Manual. What is the differences? What information can you find in there? Why do we have to follow this information? What are aircraft limitations and why are they so important to us? We're also going to look at the different types of charts that are available within these publications, and they typically follow a standard flight, such as takeoff, climb, cruise, and landing performance. So we're going to look at each one of those different types of charts. And we'll also see how the FAA is going to ask you certain questions on the FAA exam as well. In addition to that, we'll be looking at basically calculating pressure and density altitude. We've looked at pressure and density altitude our first week of class when we first started talking about our altimeter. We also talked briefly about it last week, and now we're actually going to put the pieces of the puzzle together and figure out actually how to calculate it using a chart. We can also actually calculate it using the E6B, but I'll show you that midweek here once we cover the flight planning. We'll also get into crosswind component calculations, and then what will end up happening is we're going to switch gears and talk about weight and balance and the effects of center of gravity weight shifts on performance. So what happens if your center of gravity is too far forward or too far aft? How does it affect the aircraft itself? Is it a safety related issue? Is it, does it improve your fuel economy? Does it decrease it? We're going to look at kind of the pros and cons there. As always, we may not get through everything. If we have to stop, we'd probably put a stopping point at the weight and balance section. Just remember, anything that we don't have an opportunity to cover for today, we'll go ahead and basically pick up on basically the middle part of the week for class number 11. And finally, everyone always wants to know what is the catch with our free online private pilot ground school. So as I always say, you guys have access to the live streams in 3 different locations, including on our website, YouTube, and Facebook. In addition to the live streams and the live classes, you guys have access to the recordings, which we post the day after on our website. You guys have access to our quizzes, handouts, documents, final exam, and the written test endorsement. We'll talk about the criteria here in just a moment. So at the end of the day, there really is no catch to this class. Hopefully you'll see that as we move and kind of progress week by week here. The only thing that we will do at the end of the day, as I've always said, and you'll see this in every class, is that we will terminate the free access after about 5 days after our last day of class. So our class is a little bit unusual here just because we have the holidays, and I've showed you the calendar previous to this, but our last day of class is going to be on Wednesday, December 28th, and that is actually the same day that the final exam becomes available to you. So as a quick reminder, in order to get your FAA written test endorsement from our team of instructors here, all you need to do is watch all 12 of the classes. Does not matter whether it is live or recorded. Also does not matter what platform you watch it on, our website, YouTube, or Facebook, so you can mix and match whatever works for your schedule. And then finally, when the final exam becomes available, then it's a total of 60 questions. You'll have 2.5 hours to complete it, and you just need to get an 80% or higher. If you've been following along with any of the quizzes in each of the lessons, you'll have no problem basically taking that final. As a reminder, the quiz questions are the same ones that we use for the final exam, and we basically pull them together based upon certain percentages of each of the subjects. Even if you're scoring an 80%, I encourage you to continue taking the exam, and it's going to expose you to more FAA-like test questions. At the end of the day, you just need an 80%, and you have unlimited attempts to basically make that happen. 5 days after our last day of class, we'll put everyone on Monday, January 2nd, 2023 at 11:59 p.m. Pacific Coast time. That's when we're going to basically pull down the course and the access. So that's usually enough time for everybody to take the final. I've seen people take it 10, 20, 30 times in a 5-day period and also wrap up any remaining course material that you have. Once again, the reason why we do this is it gives us a higher completion rate. Right now, we've had over 100,000 students take our class. 95% of that cohorts have actually gone on and completed the class, received the endorsement, and 99% of that group has gone on and taken the FAA written exam for the private pilot license, that is, or what we call private pilot airplane, and passed it on the first attempt. Now, we do understand that life gets in the way. There's always things that, with our best intentions of finishing things, careers, work, family, stress, all sorts of things always, kind of hamper our goals or kind of our timelines that we had in our head. Remember that we do also have access to the private pilot lifetime membership, which does give you access, obviously, to the private pilot ground school. And it does give you both the live classes, so any of the future live classes, including the ones that we do just for our members, and also the pre-recorded classes that we do professionally in the studio. We basically break down the classes. There's no breaks or anything like that. We can actually cover a little bit more material as well, just because we're not limited by time here. And those are usually in between 60 to 70 mini lessons. As I've kind of been alluding to, probably I think it was last week when we were talking about this, we are pushing out about 30% more content for the private pilot, and that's moving forward. That's actually starting to be introduced as we speak. So it's kind of exciting to see the evolution as things progress here. In addition to the private pilot ground school, you'll also have access to the private pilot oral prep course, which is designed to really prepare you for your check ride. It really highlights all the material that is pertinent and that you're required to know before you actually see, or whatever your examiner is, whether it's a DP or an FAA official. You'll also have access to the private pilot flight maneuvers. So there's about 30 plus maneuvers in there that you need to know when you're actually starting your flight training. You also have access to the PDF companion guide, which is about 900 pages of color material, about 120 pages of course notes, basically everything you need and more. You also have access to the 900 plus FAA-like test questions, which means that you get unlimited practice quizzes and exams. For most of you, if you realize that if you take the quizzes multiple times, you're not going to get the same questions. They will be jumbled, and they could be completely different questions. So the reason why we've always encouraged you to take the quizzes multiple times as well. You have 24/7 support from our team of instructors here, and also the written test endorsement and the FAA Wings credits moving forward. So that's it for my public service announcement there. All right, before I do this, there is one cheat sheet I want to make you guys aware of. This would be obviously in the last lesson. And if you went to the lesson on Friday for aviation weather and you went down beneath, now it's the recorded video, you would actually see something that says a METAR decoder. The METAR decoder will look exactly like this, and it's a 2-page document. And very simply, it will give you all the information in terms of here is a encoded METAR, and then here's all of how to exactly decode it. And it will actually do it in the correct order. It'll say METAR, and then it will have everything in here. And then what you're going to notice is that in some of these sections, like here, you have some of the most, most common abbreviations: RA for rain, SN for basically snow, FG for fog. And it's always presented in the same order. So when you guys are kind of going through this, I would encourage you guys to have this out. If you have a METAR system, or in this case, this is an ASOS, which is an automated METAR system, and it has all the bells and whistles, meaning it's basically fully loaded here, you'll see that these can be quite long if it truly does have, number one, bad weather conditions, and it also has all of the different precipitation indicators, how much rain fell every 3, 6, and 9 hours, etc., etc. But anyways, this is a 2-page document, and like I said, you can basically read this this METAR at the top and decode it, line by line, section by section, and it's in the exact same order. Okay, so I'd encourage you guys to go ahead and take a look at that if you have not, and that will really help you out as you're kind of working through some of these problems. But let's go ahead and take a look at our METARs here, and this is where we left off. So a METAR is a meteorological aviation report, and it's going to be issued every hour. And it's going to include weather at the time that it was actually reported. Okay. Now these are going to be typically updated roughly every 55 minutes past the hour, but we also have these things called special updates, or SPECI for short, which is basically some type of significant change of weather. And that could have been, an airport where it was nice and sunny 1 minute, and then all of a sudden there's a thunderstorm moving in, or maybe the winds increase significantly. Controllers and the system has a criteria which will allow them to create a special update in those circumstances. So for some of you, if you were reading Rod Machado's book, I do always include this in here, which is at the bottom. Should Tina walk Vera's rabbit without checking the dog's appetite? Some people memorize that. I have never used that, honestly, but some people like it, so I'm leaving it in there. And what you're going to notice is that it's always going to be in the exact same order. Okay, so we're going to go through these line by line and see if we can kind of pull these out and talk about them. And the best way, like I said, is to have that METAR decoder next to you, so that way you can kind of figure it out yourself. So with this, we're going to start off with basically the first line, and this is going to be a standard report. This is a METAR, so this came out roughly around 55 minutes past the hour. And then we have the actual station identification, which would be the airport. In this case, this is for Wink, Texas. Okay, Wink, Texas. The airport code is Kilo India November Kilo. Then we have the 8th day at 1955 Zulu. So it's always the day and then the Zulu time. And everybody always asks, well, how do you know what month it is? Well, I'm hoping you probably should at least know that we're either in September and right about to come up to October. So you should have a good idea at least of what the month is. And then what we've got is it's going to be our wind conditions. Okay, so our wind conditions is always going to be direction, velocity, and then gust if they apply. So very simply, we have the wind direction is 320 at 14 knots, gusting to 20 knots. Okay. Then we have our visibility. So visibility is going to be how far you can see, and that is a half a statute mile, so not too far. Then we have something called RVR, and RVR stands for runway visual range. And this is usually at some of the larger airports you're going to find this information. So very simply, along the side of your runway, you're basically going to have this device that shoots a laser beam like that into the other device, and it's literally right next to the runway that it's telling you. And effectively what when you are looking at anything that has an R in front of it, the R right here is telling you that that is something to do with an RVR, which is runway visual range, and then it tells you which runway it's associated with. So in this case, this is the RVR for runway 3R, or 3 right. Okay, so obviously there's a left runway and a right runway. So this is the RVR for 3 right, and the sensors are telling you you can see 2,400 feet down. Now the reason why is we have all of these different weather conditions. So we've got drizzle, which is DZ, and you'll notice, remember we talked about the modifiers, right? So if I had RA, which is rain, and there's no modifier here, that basically means we have moderate rain. If I've got minus in front of it, that's light rain. If I put a plus in front of it, that means we have heavy rain. Okay, so this is just moderate drizzle. Then we've got fog. Now we come to our sky conditions. And with our sky conditions, it's very important that you realize that we have obviously a few different types. We basically have sky clear. We have few, scattered, broken, and overcast. And overcast is basically a solid deck of clouds. So in this case, we have overcast clouds at 600 feet. Now the way that we read the 600 is you're always going to have three numbers, and very simply, as written right there, that is the equivalent of 600 feet. If I said 060, that would be the equivalent of 6,000 feet. And if I said 600, that would be the equivalent of 60,000 feet, or what we would call a flight level 600. Okay, that's how we would abbreviate it, flight level 600. Finally, after that, we have our temperature and our dew point. So you'll notice that these two numbers are very close together, and that's also the reason why we're indicating fog right here. So temperature of 13, dew point of 12, and our altimeter setting is 30.04. Okay. All right, everybody good on the first line? We're going to look at the next line here. So looking at the second line, we'll go ahead and erase this so we can pay attention to the second one. Remember that the standard METARs come out roughly around 55 minutes past the hour, plus or minus a couple minutes, depending on the system. The second line is a special METAR report, or what we call a SPECI for short. And we've got the station identification, which is the airport code. I believe that's Kansas City. And then we've got the day that it came out. So this was basically reported on the 8th day at 1936 Zulu. Okay, so obviously a little bit off from the 55 past that we've talked about. And here we have our direction, our velocity, and our gust. Okay, not all the time you're going to have gust unless it is really a windy situation. But in this case, at Kansas City on the 8th day at 1936 Zulu, the weather was 200 at 14 knots, gusting to 24 knots. Once again, we have a half a statute mile of visibility. Here we have another RVR, but you're going to notice that it just says the R is basically indicating, remember, if it says R34, the R is basically RVR, and then this number behind it is going to be the runway. Okay, so what we have here is we have a runway visual range on runway 34. You'll notice that there is no R or L because it only has a single runway for runway 34. So on runway 34, we can see 2,600 feet down the runway, and then we have our weather conditions. So here we have the modifier of plus, which means heavy, and the SN, which means snow. So we've got heavy snow, blowing snow, fog, and then we have this thing called vertical visibility. And remember, there's really two ways that we measure visibility. We measure visibility horizontally, how far we can see, and then we also measure things vertically. Okay, so usually if there's fog and the system is going to allow it, meaning that it has the capability, the software and whatever the hardware is installed in this thing, you'll be able to know if you look straight up, how far can you actually see? And in this case, the vertical visibility is 800 feet, so not too far. Then we've got the temperature of 0, and then the M is for -3 or -3 degrees dew point. Okay, so they can be a negative number as well. So temperature is 0, -3 on the dew point, and the altimeter is 2898. Everyone good with that? All right, let's go ahead and look at the next one here. So looking at line number 3, this is a standard report because this is a METAR, and this is going to be for Boise. Okay, so for Boise, Idaho, on the 8th day at 1953 Zulu, we have the following conditions. Wind is 230 at 8 knots. There's no gust here. We have 5 statute miles visibility, scattered clouds at 1,500 feet, temperature 19, dew point 13, altimeter 2994, and we've got a couple remarks here. We've got sea level pressure of 156, and then we also have a temperature. It says you're always going to know this is the exact temperature and also the exact dew point. So what this comes out to, or how you would read this value, is we see it says 0193012.8. Okay, so the first number in there is 19.3. And that's actually the temperature. That's the exact temperature. And what they do is anytime you read the temperature within the body here, that's rounding it either up or down. So the exact temperature is actually 19.3 degrees, but that's rounded down to 19. Then the 128 at the end is 12.8 on the dew point, and that is actually rounded up to 13 degrees on the dew point. So some of the systems that have better reporting functions will give you the exact temperature and the dew point with that decimal value there. The most basic systems will usually just give you just a temperature and dew point rounded to the closest degree that's available to you. Okay, is it really that much of a difference, or does it make any difference for us to realize that it's 19.3 and 12.8? Not really. Okay, it's not really going to make a huge difference for us as pilots. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the next line here. So for those that are asking, what are the cloud coverage? Very simply, you've got sky clear, SKC, or it's going to be CLR. That's basically no clouds in the sky. Then you have few, scattered, broken, and overcast, which is going to be obviously a full overcast layer. Okay. The last line here is for a standard METAR at Los Angeles International. This came out on the 8th day at 1955 Zulu. We have our wind conditions, right? Our direction, our velocity, and our gust. So this is 010 at 13 knots, gusting to 20. 3 statute miles visibility. We have haze. Sky is clear. Temperature 18. Dew point 11. Altimeter 2995. Okay? 2995. All right. Any questions on that before I move on here? And all of these are all going to be based off of magnetic. If you see a wind direction that's basically written down on paper like this, then that is basically going to be, or actually if it's verbal, it's going to be magnetic. And then most of the ones that are written down are going to be true. We'll look at those here in a second. All right, any other questions here? I know this just takes practice, but you guys can go to aviationweather.gov, and there's plenty of places to basically find this information where you guys could pull up random either forecast or METAR reports and then attempt to basically find it. Sky clear and clear, basically the same thing. Just 2 different ways of reporting it. And I read everything again. Let's have you guys, give you guys an opportunity to attempt to read these here. So remember, I'm going to go ahead and open up the poll, and I'll go through each one of these so you guys can see it. But remember, which of the reporting stations have VFR weather? And that's that basic VFR. So I'll give you guys a couple minutes to see if you can decipher this here. VV08 is vertical visibility at 800 feet. So if you look straight up, you could basically see 800 feet. And what other questions do we have? All right, got the first couple of answers rolling in. Take your time on those. You want to look at each one and see what you can do to decipher it. This is where, if you do have that METAR decoder, that 2-page PDF, that is helpful. Visibility is measured in statute of miles. Statute miles. And I will give you guys the cloud coverage here in 1 second. I'm just bringing up the table. do not get to use anything on the test, folks, unfortunately. So you do not get to use the cheat sheets or anything else on the exam. Not going to let you bring it into the testing center. All right, got about over 50% of the class just waiting on the other half here. Okay, for those that are asking why does something begin with K? Very simply, the K is the ICAO identifier. Okay, so if an airport starts with a K, then it's located within the I think it's the contiguous United States. So every country has their own identifier. If you go to Mexico, for example, they all start with M for their airports. If you go to Canada, it's usually C, like CYVR is basically British Columbia. That's basically the international way of being able to consolidate and identify airports. All right, we're about 75% of the way. For those that are already done, just sit tight for a second. All right, let's go ahead and do this. I will leave it open for any last minute strugglers there, but let's look at these line by line and remember what is basic VFR. This is the reason why you're going to really need to know what is basic VFR, and that comes up all the time. And basic VFR is 1,000-foot ceiling and or 3 statute miles of visibility. So anything less than 1,000-foot ceiling or less than 3 statute miles of visibility means that the airport is going to be IFR. And remember, the ceiling is the lowest of either the broken or the overcast. We do not care about scattered or few, so that's kind of irrelevant in those cases. Looking at it line by line, we'll look at it over here. This is the METAR for Wink, Texas on the 12th day at 1845 Zulu. Wind is 110 at 12, gusting to 18, 15 statute miles. So that's definitely greater than 3 statute miles. Sky is clear, so that's also good. Temperature 25, dew point 17, altimeter 3000. So this one is going to be VFR. For Boise, Idaho, standard METAR report for Boise on the 12th day at 1854 Zulu. We've got 130 at 4 knots, 30 statute miles, so that's VFR. Scattered at 15,000 feet, definitely above 1,000, so that's good. Temperature 17, dew point 6, altimeter 30.15. So this is also VFR as well. The one for Los Angeles is a METAR, so Los Angeles International on the 12th day at 1852 Zulu. The wind is 250 at 4 knots, 6 statute miles visibility, so that works. Baby rain, which is the way I memorize this, BR is mist, but you can think of it as baby rain. And we have got scattered at 700 feet. So you'll notice that 700 is less than 1,000, but is scattered considered a ceiling? And the answer to that is no. We only look at broken and overcast. So in this case, that is still considered VFR. We also have scattered clouds at 25,000 feet, temperature 16, dew point 15, altimeter 2991. So this is actually should give you a pretty good idea that it's probably something other than VFR, not always the case. But for Midway, we've got on the 12th day at 1856 Zulu, we have the wind of 320 at 5 knots, 1.5 statute miles. Keep in mind, some people, there's a large space there, but that is 1.5 or 1.5 statute miles visibility. And then we've got moderate rain, overcast at 700. So here, 1.5 statute miles is less than our 3 statute miles that we need. And overcast at 700 is also less than the 1,000 feet for 1,000 feet or greater that we need for the VFR. Temperature 17, dew point 16, altimeter 29.80. And we have a remark here that rain began at 35 minutes past the hour. So very simply what I would do is I would see when was this reported, and the rain actually began at 1835 because I can look at the hour, and this was actually reporting at 1856. So because these are less than 1,000-foot ceiling and 3 statute miles at Midway, this is going to be considered IFR. And finally, we have especially at Kennedy International Airport, JFK. On the 12th day at 1853 Zulu, the wind is 180 at 4 knots, half a statute mile. That's definitely less than 3, so that's not going to work. We've got fog. We have a runway visibility range on runway 4. We can see a whopping 2,200 feet. Overcast at 500 feet, so that's less than 1,000. And temperature 20, dew point 18, altimeter 3006. So in this case, this one is also IFR. So looking at each one of these, now that everybody's got their answer in, we had about 14% with A, 12% with B, and the majority of the class with C. So A is obviously not going to work. Wink, Texas is going to work. We've got Boise, which is going to work, but JFK does not work, so B is also incorrect. Wink, Boise, and LAX, basically the first 3 are the correct answer, and that's the reason why it is going to be C. Okay. This is pulled directly from the FAA testing supplement. So just like I've kind of went through each one of these, if you can decipher this entire thing, you're going to be in pretty good shape for the exam. Now, a lot of you were also asking about the cloud clearance, all that stuff in terms of the actual, layers. This is the official sky cover that we would be looking at. Missy also threw this in the chat earlier. So very simply, sky clear or clear, SKC or CL is just clear. There's no clouds in the sky. Few clouds, FEW, would be 1/8 to 2/8. Scattered, SCT, would be 3/8 to 4/8. Broken is BKN, and that is 5/8 to 7/8. And then overcast, OVC, is basically 8 out of 8. So just completely, a socked in layer at that point. So it'd be nice if they made these into like quarters of pizza pies, but of course they've got to do it in eighths, but that's how the numbers break down. Remember, the only 2 that we really care about in most circumstances is when we're talking about the lowest of the overcast or the broken layer for the purposes of determining the ceiling. Okay? Everybody got that? Or if you need to take a screenshot of it, we can also post that as well. I'll post it in the on the chat function. All right, moving on. The next thing we want to talk about are going to be these things called TAFs, and TAFs are basically the forecast version of the METARs. A TAF is known as is basically a terminal aerodrome forecast, or a TAF for short, and they are basically going to provide information for either a 24-hour period or a 30-hour period, depending on the airport. If you want to get an extended period, military bases and most Class Bravo airports usually always report for a 30-hour period. They're going to be updated or issued 4 times per day, so they're basically updated every 6 hours, and they use the exact same codification as METARs. And the important thing that you also need to note there is that the TAFs are basically going to provide those conditions within a 5 statute mile center of the airport's runway complex. Okay, so they're good for 5 statute miles from whatever the airport is that is providing that information. Not every airport has a TAF. A lot of times you might be sharing a TAF with a neighbor, but very simply, the way that these are basically divided up is you're going to start to see these words in here that are slightly different that will kind of separate the forecast. So the ones that you're going to pay attention to are becoming. We have from. We also have temporarily. Okay, so it's temporarily becoming something. And then we've got the probability of something occurring, and there's always going to be a number associated with it right there. So that probability of 40 is basically 40%. We have a 40% probability of something occurring. And basically what each one of these are doing is we are basically effectively saying that becoming between a date and a time right here, we're going to have these conditions. And then it's going to change from a specific day and time, we are going to have these conditions. And then it's going to be temporarily between these dates and times, these conditions. And then there's a probability statement in there as well. So to break these up just a little bit, this is what it would look like. Okay. And that's taking that last TAF that we have, and we'll see if we can kind of work our way through it. So very simply, it's very important to understand how these are written, because it is easy to get these confused. So here's a TAF for Los Angeles International, and this is going to be, this first part is basically the issue day and the time. Okay, so right here, this is your issue day of the month. So in this case, it was issued on the 9th day, And then this is our issue time. And this is reported in Zulu, okay? So in this case, this entire TAF came out on the 9th day at 11:40 Zulu. And then what we've got is our forecast period, okay? So this next statement here, see how I want to write this. This right here is going to be your forecast period. And the way that we read these is anytime that you basically have four numbers that would look something like this, okay? So it's basically two numbers. I'm going to put X and X, and I'll put Y and Y. The first two numbers are once again going to be the day of the month, and then it's going to be the hour in Zulu time, okay? And then you'll have this slash, and then it's going to basically repeat again. It'll have the day, and then it's going to have the hour in Zulu time again, okay? And anytime that you see that slash in a TAF, in this example, what we're reading is the 9th day, starting at 1200 Zulu, and I'm pulling it directly from the top there of that forecast period, and that is going to run through all the way to the 10th day at 1800 Zulu, okay? So the way that we're reading that, once again, is we have our day, the 9th day, and 1200 Zulu to the 10th day at 1800 Zulu. That is the forecast period for the entire TAF. Okay, so that is for the entire TAF. If you ever see a slash, and look, you're going to see a slash in a lot of different places, okay, obviously except for the half a statute mile that doesn't count, but all those slashes that I did, it's always going to be day, hour, to day, and hour. So going on and kind of reading this from this point, what you would right here, this is basically starting at the 9th day at 1200 Zulu, okay? Because that's where this thing starts. And at that period of time, we have the following conditions. The wind is going to be 220 at 20 knots, 3 statute miles of visibility, light showery rain, and we've got broken at 2,000 feet, okay? So that is the end of that forecast period. So the new forecast period is then going to use basically this right here, which is becoming, okay? So becoming on the 9th day at 1600 through the 9th day at 1900, we're going to have the following conditions. So very simply, the very tail end of this one right here would be where this one picks up. So if this line picks up on the 9th day at 1600, this basically ended on the 9th day, you want to be precise, at 1559 Zulu. Okay, so that first line was really from the 9th day at 1200 Zulu to the 9th day at 1559 Zulu, and then becoming at the 9th day at 1600 Zulu to the 9th day at 1900 Zulu, we have the following conditions. Wind is 330 at 15, okay? And then we've got a new set of criteria in terms of a new date and time. So anytime that you see the word from right here, from means that it is an exact period of time. So what you're going to have is you have from, and then you're basically going to have the day of the month, and then you're going to have some type of Zulu time. And the Zulu time is actually going to be 4 numbers. So what we've got here is this is going to be from the 10th day at 0300 Zulu. There is no slash in there. So remember, the slashes are basically from one period to another period. This is telling you exactly on the 10th day at 0300 Zulu, we have the wind is 350 at 14 knots, 2 statute miles of visibility. We've got thunder showers and rain and overcast at 1500 feet. Okay. Then we've got another modifier here, which is telling us that now it's going to temporarily become something else. And it's going to become that on the 10th day at 600 through the 10th day at 1200. We have the following conditions that will occur. And that is 1 statute mile of visibility and heavy rain. Then we've got another modifier. And this modifier is telling us that there is a probability of something occurring. Okay. And the probability here is 40, or a 40% chance that from the 10th day at 0800 through the 10th day at 0900, there is a 40% chance that we will get a half a statute mile of visibility and fog, right? Half a statute mile of visibility and fog. right, everybody good with that as best they can for the moment? Or any questions? So you'll realize that when we're looking at the forecast period, keep in mind the forecast period versus the issue day and time. That's probably the number one thing that people mess up there. Realize that the forecast period is starting on the 9th day at 1200. And in this example, at the very, very end here, the forecast is going to run through the 10th day at 1800 Zulu. And that's basically the very, very last sentence at the end there. Okay. Hopefully your brain doesn't melt too much. So what is the weather from 10:09 to 10:18? So basically the weather would just be a continuation. Very clear. All right. Probability is just the probability of whatever this is going to occur. For this 1 hour period between 0800 and 0900, we are expecting a 40% chance of a half a statute mile and fog. Minus SHRA is light showery rains, or what we would say light rain showers for simplicity. Okay. So these are just going to take some practice to kind of go over. I did cut out one line there. That's the reason why you guys aren't seeing it all the way till the end. Okay. Becoming is from 1600 to 1900. Yep, you are correct. PSRA is basically thunder showers with rain. Oh, where's Waldo? I like it. Let's do this so we can keep pushing on. You guys get an opportunity to read through this as well, and we will go over this. So what is the valid period for the TAF for Memphis? You have obviously figure 15 on the right. You've got, make sure you obviously select Memphis instead of Oklahoma City, and then just figure out what is the appropriate valid period here. 0300 is 0300 Zulu, or basically 0300 Zulu. All right, you got the first 10% in. Clear as mud, right? All right, about 50% in so far. About 75% in. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this one. So I'm just going to do Memphis here, but this is another one that is pulled directly from Figure 15 in your testing supplement. So I would encourage you guys to take a look at it. Most of the written test questions that you're going to find relating to TAFs are going to be part of these two TAFs. So if you're able to decipher what you guys see on the screen, you should be good to go moving forward. Okay. So let's take a look at it in the bigger sense. We know that we're looking at Memphis here, and very simply going back to the question, they want to know what the validity period or the valid period for the TAF was. Okay. So some people said it incorrectly, and what we're looking at is we usually have the date. This would be the date, and then that right there would be the time. So in this case, remember, this was going to be issued on the 12th day at 1720 Zulu, okay? Then what we've got is we basically have the validity period, right? This is when it's going to be valid from. So it's going to be valid on the 12th day from 1800 through the 13th day at 2400 Zulu, okay? So that's really what the question is asking for. Now I'll keep reading it real quick just so we can do one of these before the break here. But the other thing too is you also want to look at whatever the modifiers are, and it kind of helps to separate out where are the forecast periods. So very simply, we've got a few different breaks here. So we've got the probability 40%. We have from a certain time there. We have another probability. We've got from probability becoming temporary and from. So that's all of the different breaks that you're going to have in between. So very simply, what we've got on the first line is 200 at 12 knots, 5 statute miles, haze broken at 3,000 feet. Okay. And to make life simple here for those that were looking at what is the correct answer that we're looking for, basically it's the valid period. It's 74% of the class with A, which was the 12th day at 1800 Zulu through the 13th day at 2400 Zulu. Okay, a few people, about 20%, over 20% of the class had B and C there. Then we've got we have a probability, a 40% chance that basically on the 12th day at 2000 to the 12th day at 2200 for a 2-hour period, there's a 40% chance that we will have 1 statute mile of visibility, basically thunderstorms with rain, and overcast at 800. Someone would ask what CB is. CB is cumulonimbus clouds. They're the only cloud type that's actually reported in the TAF. We don't care about any other type of clouds. Then from the 12th day at 2200 Zulu, we have the following conditions. Wind is 330 at 15, gusting to 20. The P6, P means greater than or plus, so that's greater than 6 statute miles visibility. Broken at 1500, overcast at 2500, and then we've got a new forecast period. We have another probability statement, so there's a 40% chance that between on the 12th day at 2000 through the 12th day at 2200, 40% chance that there's 3 statute miles visibility and showery rain or rain showers. And then from the 12th day at 0200, we have the following conditions. Wind is 350 at 12 knots, overcast at 800 feet. And then we've got another forecast as well. We have a 40% chance probability that on the 12th day at 0200 to the 12th day at 0500, we would have approximately 2 statute miles, and it's because of light rain showers, the minus RASN. So minus RA is light rain, and SN would be the snow showers, so light snow showers there. And then a new forecast becoming on the 13th day at 0600 to the 13th day at 0800 for this 2-hour period. It would be 020 at 8 knots, broken at 1,200 feet. And we've got a new forecast here becoming on the 13th day at 1000 through the 13th day at 1200. So for a 2-hour period, if you see wind of 0000, that is basically wind calm. There is no wind that's being reported at that point. So wind calm, 3 statute miles of visibility. We've got our baby rain, so we've got mist, sky clear. And then temporarily becoming on the 12th day at 1200 through the 12th day at 1400 for a 2-hour period, a half a statute mile of visibility and fog. And then finally, to wrap it up, we've got from the 13th day at 1600, our wind is variable at 6 knots, greater than 6 statute miles. That's the P, so plus 6 statute miles, sky clear, and then we have the termination of the report, which is the equal sign. Okay, so like I said, you guys can go back through the recording and take a look at that. At this point, I will leave the bottom one to you guys so you guys can see if you can decipher it. There is really nothing in the bottom one that's really any different than the top one that we have not covered thus far. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break before all your brains explode out there. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the different changes within the weather services for some of our rusty pilots. And then we're going to get into significant weather, and then we'll push on to our performance. So with that, go ahead and stretch your legs, grab something to eat or drink, recaffeinate, reburnate, rebourbonate, whatever your drink of choice is out there. And I'll see everybody back here in 10. everybody, welcome back from break, and we're going to push on with our weather section. We should get it wrapped up here very, very shortly. So a couple things before we begin, though. We are going to go over some systems that have now been discontinued. Some students that are brand new to aviation always ask, we usually get an email or so, why are you talking about systems that don't apply to us? Because just keep in mind that there are what we have rusty pilots, people who already have licenses and maybe have not been flying for a couple years, that take our classes. So we just want to make sure that they understand, you know, some of the changes within the National Aerospace System and some of the weather products that used to be with us, that they were probably used to, are no longer with us. So sit tight if you're new. For those that are previous pilots, this is just some updates for you guys. So there are a couple different changes, and this, you know, regardless of if you're new or if you've been around the block, you'll realize that these products come and go. They're always being replaced by the latest and greatest. Couple that have kind of departed us are going to be the HIWAS, or which was called the Hazardous In-Flight Weather Advisory Service. This was discontinued last year, January 8th last year. So if you have any old charts, if you were to look on any of the VORs, you would actually see these H's, and the H would basically tell you that it had HIWAS capabilities. And it was just an automated voice that basically would let you know within a large geographic area that there was either going to be a SIGMET, an AirMet, or something else associated with it. For those of you that disliked radar summary charts, those are also out of the way as well. So radar summary chart basically was providing information about cells, and it would usually give you the height. It would also give you the radar echoes, and it would give you information about rain and hail to basically help you indicate areas of precipitation. So these have also gone by the wayside. And then finally, we also have the area forecasts that have also been put out to pasture. So for those that remember this, the area forecast was like the big picture. And when I mean big picture, I mean, let's look at 7 different states and let's talk about what the overall weather is going to be over, you know, across a very, very large area. And usually the only thing it would tell you is that it's either VFR or it's IFR or it's marginal. So obviously we have a much better weather information nowadays. You can see here that this is an example of one that basically included a lot of states: Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, all the way through New Mexico there in a single area forecast. So these are also put out to pasture. Now, the area forecast we still actually have, but we don't actually have it as a textual format anymore. The area forecast has actually been replaced by what is now known as the graphical forecast, or what we call the GFA tool. So if you are looking for a larger area forecast, or kind of look at the big picture, if you will, you can go and find the GFA tool on the aviationweather.gov site. And what this does is it gives you a complete picture of all of the, you know, weather that has the potential of impacting flights, not only in the United States, but the Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean. And it also covers some of their outlying stations in the Atlantic and the Pacific. So it is a fairly, large database of information. It does provide updates, and it does it far more frequently, and you can actually turn on and off the functionality, so you guys can kind of see the areas in terms of what do you want to actually look at for the graphical forecast, whether it's precipitation, winds, thunderstorms, turbulence, ice, and the list kind of goes on and on. And then you can also look at the winds aloft graphically as well, and they'll actually show it to you in 3,000 foot increments all the way up to 48,000 feet. So this is the new tool that is out there, and it does provide a bit more information, and you can actually get more precise information as well using the GFA tool. Okay, no direct link. You can just go to aviationweather.gov, Jerry. So aviationweather.gov, the same link I gave you guys the other day. And if you go under forecast, you'll see the graphical forecast tool that looks just like this. All right, the next one that you guys need to be aware of is this thing called Winds Aloft. And Winds Aloft are going to be issued 4 times per day, and they're valid for either 6, 12, or 24-hour periods. And they're always going to give you the information in terms of when they were issued as well. Okay, so winds are true based off of your true direction, not magnetic like METARs, so a little bit different. And what's always important when we look at these things is always read the information in the panels. So very simply, this entire forecast example here is based on the 15th day at 1200 Zulu, the data from that time period, but it's valid at 1600 Zulu to be used between 1800 and 0300 Zulu. Okay, so if you're flying between 1800 and 0300 Zulu, then this is the data that you'd want to use. The other thing to note is that temperatures above 24,000 feet, basically right here, everything above 24,000 feet is going to be assumed to be a negative number, okay? Now, the information that it provides is this column, or this row that we've got right there, is basically showing you all the altitudes. So 3, 6, 9, 12, 18,000, and so forth. And then we have all the station identifiers going down the first row, depending on where you are looking at. So Denver, Kansas City, St. Louis, some of them I recognize, some I don't. And very simply, if we look at these, I'm going to look at St. Louis, and I'm going to look at right here at this one at 6,000 feet. So the numbers are always going to be presented in this way. So it's 23, 25, and in this case, it's plus 0.7. The way that we read this is, once again, we unbunch the numbers, and it's always going to be the direction, then it will be the velocity, and then it will be the temperature, okay? So very simply, if I were to decode that, you take the first two numbers, which is 23, and no matter what, we're always going to add a 0 to it, okay? So 23 becomes 230, and then we've got the velocity. 25 doesn't change. That's still 25 knots, okay? And then plus 0.7 is just 7 degrees Celsius, okay? And you can put the plus in there if you want to. So some of them will not have a temperature. So very simply, if I were going to look at St. Louis at 3,000 feet right here, that would be the equivalent of 210 at 13 knots, but there is no temperature reported. If you have anything that's blank, that's basically either not reported or the altitude's too low for it to actually report. Okay, so that's that one. If we look at going to a higher altitude, let's look at St. Louis, for example, at 30,000 feet here. Okay, so for 30,000 feet, the numbers that we have are basically 2, 3, 9, 4, 4, 0. So what I've got is that will translate to 230. Wind is coming from 230 at 94 knots. And the temperature is going to be minus 40 degrees Celsius. And we know it's minus 40 degrees Celsius because anything above 24,000 feet, and this one's at 30,000 feet, is going to be a negative value. The reason why they are not written out is, think of it back in the day, in the 50s and 60s and 70s, when these all came out via teletype. There's only so many characters and there's only so much room for a certain amount of digits. Okay, so that's the reason why it's not written out. Obviously, we don't have those problems nowadays. Now, occasionally, you're going to run into issues where the wind is going to be greater than 99 knots. So if that's the case, then we have to basically do this math trick. So looking at St. Louis at 34,000 feet, you're going to realize that I've got the following numbers. I've got 73, 06, and 49. Okay, so I can't just add a 0 to 73 because there is no such direction of 730, right? We only are basically between 0 or basically between 1 and 360 degrees. So very simply, what you have to do, and this is just a rule that you need to memorize, is you're always going to subtract 50 from the first number, and then you're going to add 100 to the second number. Okay, subtract 50 from the first number and add 100 to the second number. So 73 less 50 is going to give me 23. I'm still going to add that 0 in there, okay? So my wind direction is 230 at 100 plus 6 is 106 knots. And then my temperature is still going to carry down to minus 49 degrees Celsius because I'm above 24,000 feet, right? Now, the other one that we've got, I'll do another one example like that. We'll look at the one for St. Louis on the far right, lower right for 39,000 feet. And these numbers are, rate these, 73, 19, and 60. Okay, so subtract 50 and add 100 because it's over that value. So in this case, I've got 23. I'm going to add a 0 to it. So that's wind is coming from 230 at 119 knots. And our temperature is still minus 60 degrees Celsius because we're above 24,000 feet. Okay? Everyone good with that? And remember, they're all based off of true. Okay, they're all going to be based off of true, and they're not based off of magnetic, such as what you would hear over the radio or your METARs. All right, Now it's your turn to see if you guys can figure one of these out. So once again, pulling a test question directly kind of correlating from figure 17, which is found in the testing supplement. So refer to the figure below and determine the wind and temperature aloft forecast for MKC at 6,000 feet. All right, got the first couple of answers rolling in. There's the first third of the class. Right, we're at about 70%, getting there. So what you guys will realize in the real world here is that for the most part, you're only really going to be tested on these for your written test. If you go out to the multitude of weather products, even the FAA ones, you can hit the decode button and it's going to give you the exact winds aloft information, the METAR information, all that fun stuff. So all right, so we have about 85% of the class with A, couple people on B, and about a little over 12% with C so far. So let's see if we can figure this one out. So very simply, first off, obviously try to figure out where these are located. So we're looking at MKC at 6,000 feet. So I'm going to come down to the station. This is MKC. This is the 6,000 foot column. So what I'm actually going to try to figure out is this number right there. And if I pencil that in, I've got 2, 0, and I'm just going to separate them because remember the first number is basically going to be your direction, and then the second number is going to be the velocity, and then the third number is basically going to be your temperature. So I've got 2006 and plus 03. So 200 at 6 knots, and our temperature is plus 3 degrees Celsius. And if we look at those, we basically can see that B is just not even close to correct. Everything else matches up, right? We have 200 on all these. We have 6 knots on all these. We have the temperature, which looks right. It's just the main difference is either magnetic or true. And remember, winds aloft are based off of true. They're not based off of magnetic. So in this case, A is the correct answer, and C is incorrect just because of that word that does say magnetic. Okay. All right, moving on. The next thing we're going to talk about is going to be your airmets and sigmets. So airmets are basically, there's two different types of things that we're going to talk about: airmets, sigmets, and then there's something called a center weather advisory that we're not going to spend as much time on. So an airmet is an airman meteorological information report, and there are several different types of airmets. The types that we have are basically airmet tangos, sierras, and zulus, and they're going to warn of significant weather, but they're going to be slightly lower than those of sigmets, which are for significant meteorological issues. Okay, these are issued every 6 hours with unscheduled releases when they're required. And very simply, they're going to give you kind of a boundary area of where these things are going to be located. So if you were to pull these in a report, if I look at the airmet for turbulence, for example, okay, very simply, we know this is an airmet because it has the code WA and it has the time and the date, the 5th day at 14:45 Zulu. Airmet Tango update 2 for turbulence valid until the 5th day at 2100 Zulu. And then you're going to realize that all these things in red here are basically different VORs or airport codes. And effectively what it's doing is it's giving you a boundary in terms of if you were to draw all these lines like the author did, this is the area for turbulence that they're specifically talking about. So a lot of times what I do is these can be quite lengthy. When we look at the flight planning on Wednesday, you're going to realize that sometimes these are a larger paragraph than what you see. Usually skipping down to the very, very end there and just reading why it is the case. So this is occasional moderate turbulence below 6,000 feet due to strong and gusty winds. Okay, so that's one. If you have an AirMet for this one, which is an AirMet for IFR conditions, or what we call AirMet Sierra, same thing will apply. We've got our bounds in terms of where are all these VORs between San Antonio and the rest of it. So basically within this given region right here. And pretty much the main thing that it's always going to tell you for an AirMet Sierra is it's always going to tell you occasional ceilings below 1,000 feet and visibility below 3 statute miles. That's because it's less than VFR. If you go to the very end of the sentence, it will tell you the reason why. So in this case, we have precipitation and fog conditions that are going to be occurring during that time. That's the reason why we have AirMet Sierra. So very simply, there are 3 different types of AirMets, and AirMets are going to apply to all pilots. Okay, they do apply to all pilots, and this is stuff that you need to pay attention to. Even though that in general aviation, this is probably going to be more applicable to you than an airline pilot. All pilots are reading this information. Airline pilots, on the other hand, because they have more advanced equipment, for the most part, these things are not going to be an issue. They're not going to ground an airplane or an airline, for example, because there's IFR conditions or there's some moderate turbulence or some moderate icing. Most of these things for general aviation, though, you want to kind of think, though, these will have an impact on your flight. So the 3 different types that we have, first one is AirMet Sierra, and this is basically mountain obscuration or IFR conditions. And this is going to be issued when the following conditions occur. So it's ceilings less than 1,000 feet and visibility less than 3 statute miles. It has to affect over 50% of the area at one time, or we say it's extensive mountain obscuration. Keep in mind, it does not have to be based on, it could occur in the Midwest where there are no mountains. So just keep that in mind as well. AirMet Tango is for turbulence, so this would be issued for moderate turbulence, sustained surface winds of 30 knots or greater, and or non-convective low-level wind shear. So remember, low-level wind shear is wind shear that occurs within 1,000 feet AGL, and non-convective meaning that it's not basically dealing with any type of convective activity, such as a thunderstorm or anything along those lines. And then we have AirMet Zulu, which is basically for icing. And this is going to be moderate icing, and it also provides the freezing level in terms of where's that freezing level in heights. So it's also good information for you to have as well. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at your first FAA test question that's going to deal with AirMets here. Nothing to really decipher. The main thing you want to keep in mind is that for the purposes of your written and also for your check guide, you do need to know all the different types of AirMets and SIGMETs, and you also need to know what weather conditions would warrant the issuance of each type. For this one, AirMets are advisories of significant weather phenomenon, but of lower intensities than SIGMETs, and are intended for dissemination to, is it only IFR pilots, all pilots, or only VFR pilots? All right, about 60% so far. You can pick up AirMets and SIGMETs, Jerry, from flight service stations. You can pick them up from your pre-flight weather reports that you'll pull. A number of locations. You can also pick them up on aviationweather.gov. All right, we're about 80% in. Right, about 90%. And I'm going to show you guys how to pull the weather report through 1-800-WX-BRIEF, the online system. So if you guys want to, get a jump start and get your username and password, it is complimentary. You're just going to go to 800-WX-BRIEF and fill out the information. You'll be all set if you want to follow along on Wednesday. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call it there. Apologize if I cut off anyone. We've got about 94% of the class with the correct answer. A couple people on A and C there, but AirMets, and really all AirMets and SIGMETs, they're going to go to all pilots regardless. So these are going to be disseminated to all pilots, and really it's going to enhance safety at the end of the day. So SIGMETs are basically larger versions of an AirMet, and this stands for a significant meteorological information. And these are going to be advisories of non-convective weather that is potentially hazardous to all aircraft, both big and small. So this is potentially hazardous also to those larger airliners as well. So keep in mind that these would be some of the things that would warrant the issuance of a SIGMET, and they're read exactly the same way. For example, this is a SIGMET, and this is SIGMET Papa 1. We've got a valid time from the 5th day at 2110. Covers a large area there from Memphis, 30 north of MEI to BTR, all these places. So basically within this given range. Occasional severe icing above freezing level expected. Freezing level is 8,000 feet to the east and 12,000 to the west. Conditions are going to continue beyond 2100 Zulu. Now, with this, these would be the conditions. So we've got severe or greater turbulence over a 3,000 square mile area, severe or greater icing over a 3,000 square mile area, or instrument meteorological conditions, IMC, over a 3,000 square mile area, and it has to be due to dust, sand, or volcanic ash. So any one of those conditions over that large area there would basically warrant the issuance of a SIGMET. All right, the last one we're going to talk about is a convective SIGMET, and once again, these are going to be issued for any type of convective activity within the continental United States. They're read the exact same way. Thing you'll notice is it will say convective SIGMET instead of just SIGMET. So this is convective SIGMET 20 Charlie. It's valid until 2055. It covers Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and we basically have the vicinity of whatever those two stations are. There's a line of thunderstorms, and it's forecast to 2055 Zulu. A line of thunderstorms is developing by 1955 Zulu, and it will move eastward at 30 to 35 knots through 2055. Hail to 1.5 inches is possible, and then it has an outlook as well, letting you know some further information. And once again, we read it the same way. It's basically the 22nd day to 2055 to the 23rd day at 0, or actually 55 past the hour there. Okay. So these would be the conditions that you want to kind of pay attention to, and because these are convective SIGMETs, these are going to be updated or valid for a 2-hour period, and a lot of times they're going to be extended beyond that 2-hour period because thunderstorms don't just dissipate after 2 hours. So this would be issued if we have an area of embedded thunderstorms, which would be, or a line of thunderstorms like we see in the example here. Thunderstorms greater than or equal to VIP level 4, affecting 40% or more of an area, at least 3,000 square miles. VIP level 4 is an old term. It stands for Video Integrator Processor Level. And very simply, what we've got is you're going to see scallops kind of like this. Okay, so this would be like a storm cell. And what we mean by VIP level 4 is basically this is level 1. That's level 2, that's level 3, and that's level 4. So basically, it's a fairly intense system, but just keep in mind that VIP level 4 is Video Integrator Processor level 4. The other one is going to be severe surface weather, including surface winds greater than or equal to 50 knots. It's pretty quick. Hail at the surface greater than or equal to 3/4 of an inch in diameter. It also includes tornadoes and severe thunderstorms as well. Okay, so those would be all the conditions in which you're most likely to see a convective SIGMET be issued. All right, so going to some of those conditions, let's go ahead and see if you guys can identify what information is contained in a convective SIGMET. Got the first couple answers rolling in. All right, there's about 50% of the way done. And 75%. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this one. We've got about 58% of the class with A, 6% with B, and 34% with C. So once again, the majority of the class has it. It is going to be A, and it is tornadoes, embedded thunderstorms, and hail. I know why most people always usually say C. It's because you hear me talk about this VIP level 4, and while that is correct, the problem why this is not correct is because the surface winds are greater than 40 knots. It actually should be greater than 50 knots if that was correct. If it said greater than 50 knots with the VIP of level 4, then C would be correct, but because it doesn't, it's actually incorrect. And then B is also incorrect as well. Severe icing, severe turbulence, those two are good, but widespread dust storms lowering visibility to less than 3 miles. That's actually going to be a SIGMET. That's not in a convective SIGMET in that circumstance. Okay. All right. The last one that we're going to talk about with weather is called your PIREPs or pilot reports. And these are things where a pilot is actually going to report the actual weather conditions of what they're encountering in flight. And there's two different types of pilot reports. There is a UA, which is a routine PIREP, and then we've got a UUA, which is an urgent PIREP. And you don't get to tell the ATC which one it is. They determine it based upon whatever report that you provide to them. So you could provide this information to flight service stations. You can provide it to any controller, whether it's a tower controller, a center controller, a TRACON, whoever you want to, and they'll basically write it down for you. The standard format, once again, is always going to be the same format that you can see here, where it's going to have a location, time, and so forth, and it does have all these funky abbreviations that you see on the left-hand side. So basically what you would do is you're going to kind of make that report to the best of your ability. And these are somewhat subjective. The one that I usually see the most that are going to be incorrect is turbulence. Some people cannot stand turbulence, and they're going to report it as severe no matter what. And the reality is you're going to go fly through it, and it's like it may not even be classified as turbulence. It's like a bump. So always pay attention when you're reading through PIREPs. These are two that are pulled directly from aviationweather.gov, and it's always going to tell you the flight level. So here, this is at 38,000 feet. This is one that I'm not going to pay attention to. But the other thing I'm also going to kind of look at here is what is the type of aircraft. So very simply, at 38,000 feet, this is an Airbus A380, and they are basically reporting moderate turbulence. So obviously, if this was closer to the ground, let's say they were at 6,000 feet and they're flying over the LA basin, and if you have an A380 reporting moderate turbulence at 6,000, you can pretty much bet your keister that you're going to be in for one heck of a ride if you're going to be in that same area in a much smaller aircraft. Okay. Now on the flip side of that, here's a little baby Cessna 152, which is a two-seater. This is at 7,500 feet, and very simply, they're saying turbulence is moderate below 7,500. So I take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. Sometimes they're accurate, sometimes they're right. We do have exact definitions for turbulence. The problem is that for some people it is fairly subjective, and they don't necessarily like turbulence, or they're not used to whatever the current reports are. But basically, we've got light, moderate, severe, and then extreme. So keep in mind, extreme is, when you're talking about severe is a loss of control of your aircraft. Extreme is structural damage of the aircraft. So it has to be fairly significant when they're reporting that. So when we're looking at a typical pilot report, very simply, we will always look at what type it is. So a UA is basically a routine pilot report. Then we've got where is it located. So this is basically between Oklahoma and I believe that's Tulsa. The time is 1800. The flight level, in this case, is 12,000 feet, and the type of aircraft is a BE-90. I think that's a King Air. Then we have our sky conditions, which is 1,800 broken. 5,500 to 7,200, it's actually overcast, so we've got a layer of overcast. Then at 8,900, it's going to be clear above. Our temperature is -9. Our wind velocity and direction here is basically 090 at 21 knots. The turbulence was moderate at 55 to 7,200. The icing was light, moderate, and then clear, which is at 7,200 to 8,900 is when that actually occurred. Okay. So what I want you guys to do is take a look at this PIREP down here and see if you can figure out what is going to best associate with that question. So the wind and temperature at 12,000 feet MSL as reported by the pilot are the following. TP Cessna C-152 is a Cessna 150 or 152, so that's the two-seater trainer. TA is temperature. Not sure what the A stands for in that case. All right, first couple answers are rolling in. There is the first third of the class. That's a good guess, Cody. I'd have to look it up, honestly, for TA. Right, there is 50% of the class. You guys are taking your time on this one. There's 75%. So looking in, for whoever's asking that, I was looking in the Aviation Weather Services book. The TA is actually backwards. It stands for air temperature. I don't know why they put it as TA, but TA is temperature. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at it. Sorry if we cut off anyone. I've got about 25% of the class with B, about 74% of the class with C, and a couple people on A there. So taking a look at this, let's see if we can decipher it. This is effectively pretty much the same one we looked at. So this is going to be a standard PIREP, and it's over Oklahoma and Tulsa. The time reported was 1800 at 12,000 feet. The type of aircraft was a BE-90. Sky conditions were broken at 1800. The top was 5,500, and then it's overcast from 7,200. On the top of that was 8,900, and then it was clear above that. The temperature, or I guess what they're calling in the FAA version, is the, what did I just say, air temperature, is going to be -7. Your wind velocity is 080 at 21. Light turbulence between 5,500 and 7,200. And then we have light to moderate rime ice between 7,200 and 8,900. So very simply, the wind and temperature at 12,000 feet, when we look at this, is just like what the majority of the class said here. It's going to be 080, which is found right there, at 21 knots, which is there. And we've got -7 or -7. So C is the most appropriate answer. Okay. All right, great job, everyone. So that basically wraps up the aviation weather. Now, keep in mind, we just literally cracked the surface on it. There is so much more that you can know. And as you go up the food chain, if you end up getting your instrument rating, you'll learn about different icing conditions and how to read those types of charts. If you end up going onto your commercial, you'll start to learn a little bit more about the jet stream. You'll also learn how to read some of the high altitude charts as well for the purposes of the commercial. So as I said before, if this is a topic that interests you, I would encourage you guys to take a look at the Blue Book, which is that aviation weather, and also the aviation weather services that are produced by the FAA. It has pretty good information in there, and it definitely expands upon what we can teach, at least for this purpose of this class. Okay. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to switch gears and get into aircraft performance here. So with aircraft performance, keep in mind that for our class, I'm going to give you some performance information based upon a Cessna 172, which is a standard aircraft when we're going through our flight planning on Wednesday. What you guys are going to end up doing is you want to become familiar with your specific aircraft that you are going to be flying. And make sure that you understand where to find the information and what are the capabilities and equipment installed inside of your aircraft. And no matter what, every single aircraft is going to have something called an aircraft pilot operating handbook or an approved flight manual. Okay. Before I get into that, though, you will see all of these types of documents. Though this is an older one that I've got. This is, if I hide behind it, this is a Cessna information manual from 1981. It's for a 172. The giveaway here is that anytime you guys see the word information manual, these are really just for reference, but we don't actually want to use these. Your airplane has a very specific book that is effectively dedicated to that aircraft. So the information manuals are just generic information for all 1981 172Ps in this case, but inside of your aircraft, you will have the manual that is specific to your airplane. A lot of times you'll have a combined manual for most of the new airplanes, which is the pilot's operating handbook and the approved flight manual, or AFM. It'll be one and the same. And the way that you can basically verify on a new plane that you have the correct manual is all of them are going to be serialized. So the serial number on the first page should match the serial number inside the door jamb on the pilot side when you open it up. So first things first, when you look at this information, as I said, very important that you're actually looking at it for your airplane. I'm going to give it to you for an actual airplane on Wednesday. But the differences between the POH and AFM, the AFM is going to be what we call a regulatory document. So this is telling everybody, or the pilots in this case, the regulations in which the aircraft was certified, either under Part 23, 25, or some of the other parts as well. And the POH is going to basically be what we call a gamma-defined document, which contents, or whose contents, meet the regulatory requirements of an approved flight manual and present other information in a standardized way so that a pilot can go from a Cessna to a Piper to a Mooney and browse the book to learn about the airplane that you're actually flying. Okay. So what we mean by, standardizing it is all the chapters are going to be the same. The information is going to be different. If I told you to look at chapter 2, regardless of if it's a Cessna, a Mooney, or a Piper, and all of the standardized AFMs, chapter 2 is always going to be limitations. I told you to look at chapter 6, it's always going to be weight and balance for regardless of the airplane. Now, all aircraft manufactured after March 1st of 1979 are required to have an AFM. Some of you may just have a POH if you have an aircraft that's older than that, or pretty much everyone after that period, it's a combined AFM, or it could be a combined POH AFM in a single document. These are the standardized sections, or what we're going to call the chapters. So we always have general information, the limitations, emergency procedures, and normal procedures. So if you ever lose your checklist or anything else, you'll always have a copy of this inside the aircraft. All of your performance charts are going to be in section 5. That's what we're going to specifically look at. You're going to have weight and balance and an equipment list, if applicable. If your airplane has one, they'll be found in section 6. Airplane and your systems description. So this would be how all of the different systems actually operate in your aircraft, whether it is the electrical system or your flaps or anything else. Handling service and maintenance information is 8. This is all of your information that's basically in regard to, maintenance type things, anything that's really special about your aircraft that you need to be aware of, potentially as an owner. And then the last section section 9 is all the supplements. Anytime you guys buy like a GPS or anything that's installed, a lot of those manufacturers will have supplements that will be needed that you'll actually need to add to the very end of the POH AFM. So that way you'll have it on hand, like autopilots, GPSs, new radios also have this stuff as well. Okay. So that is what it looks like in the standardized sense. So you always want to make sure that no matter what, you understand whether you have a POH or an AFM in the aircraft that you're flying, and then also become familiar with your information. So very simply, this is the difference between a Cessna and a Piper. The Piper is on the left-hand side, and the Cessnas are on the right-hand side, and this is section 5. And you're going to realize that the manufacturers, they have a majority of the charts are roughly the same, except Pipers have some extra charts that Cessnas don't. You're also going to realize that Pipers the charts are more difficult to read than the Cessnas. So they're always in the same order. So the idea behind it when you read the performance section is at the very, very top. This is all of basically your takeoff section. So, this is your, information about, your ground roll and your takeoff roll. And then it will usually go into the climb section, your climb performance or time, distance, and fuel to climb. And then we kind of have the en route section, okay, which is all the engine performance, the range, the endurance, and then basically it reverses itself into a landing. So if you read the performance section, the very front of it is really dealing with your takeoff all the way through landing, which should be the very tail end of that chapter or that section. Now, as I said before, what we have on the left-hand side is you're going to notice that there are some charts that are available on Pipers, but Cessnas don't have them. A good example of this that we're going to look at is, for example, the time, fuel, and distance to climb. Okay, time, fuel, and distance to climb is something that both manufacturers have, but if you look at Pipers on the left-hand side, it has a time, fuel, and distance to descend, but it doesn't actually have that information for a Cessna. Cessnas don't produce that. So I'm going to show you guys on Wednesday how to calculate that with some simple math. But if it has it, you're going to use it. If it doesn't have it, then you're going to have to calculate it, right? So what this actually looks like if we were to look at the climb performance. So we're actually going to look at chart 5-15, which is climb performance. And that is also on the right-hand side. I'll pull that one. That is, I think, 5-5, I believe. So these two charts are telling you the exact same thing. The one on the left is for a Piper. The one on the right is going to be for a Cessna. And unfortunately for the FAA, you will have to do these charts where you're going to have to link up the lines and then figure out the information. And we'll show you guys how to do this after the break. But very simply, if I knew that I was going to be flying, let's say at 6,000 feet as an example, and the outside air temperature is going to be, let's say, 20 degrees Celsius. Very simply, if I was a Cessna, and this is actually, I believe, for a Cessna 152 here, all I'm going to do is, it's based off of your max gross weight. I would look at what altitude I intend on flying, which would be 6,000 feet. And then all I'm going to do is look for the closest temperature, which is 20. And very simply, the number that I get is 415 feet per minute. So, and I'd have to basically make sure that whatever the conditions are in the book flaps up full throttle, and then my mixture is leaned above 3,000. That means I'd get to 415. Okay, so Cessnas are a little bit easier in that sense when we were going through the performance information. We look at Piper, on the other hand, there's always going to be an example problem, and for that, here is the example problem up here, and that's what this dashed line is basically showing you, here's the example information. This is how we're basically showing you how to figure it out. For us, we're going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to look at 20 degrees, which is my outside air temperature, and I am going to 6,000 feet. So very simply, this line right here represents 6,000 feet. So I'm basically going to follow this one up. And then once I get to the 6,000 foot mark, I will basically draw a line to the right. And then that is effectively going to tell me what my climb rate is for this specific aircraft. So if I do that, it is looking just under roughly, I don't know, that looks like it's about 20, 40, 60, 80, about probably closer to about 380 feet per minute based on 20 degrees. Okay, so it's a little bit more work to do that, but You will actually have the ones on the left. They're more complicated, but you will actually have to do these on the written exam as well. The other thing too is that if the FAA wants to make it difficult on you, and they do quite a lot, instead of saying, hey, I'm going to make it easy with the chart on the right for the Cessna, and it's going to be 20 degrees, then I'm actually going to make it 10 degrees Celsius. And you're going to notice that we don't have 10 degrees Celsius. It's somewhere between 0 and 20, which means that I basically need to interpolate the numbers and figure out what would be the difference between 475 and 415, and basically divide it by 2, which is effectively taking the average. And then I can basically use that information for 10 degrees, okay? So we're going to be looking at how to do that more specifically, and especially with our density altitude when we come back. Now, when we come back from the break though, so those are kind of the differences that we have between, manufacturers. So like I said, make sure that you're comfortable with whatever aircraft you're flying, and make sure that you understand the charts inside, because every manufacturer is slightly different. When we come back from the break, what we're going to do is we're going to watch a video on density altitude. And it's a quick little video, and you're going to have a pilot that's basically operating a high performance aircraft at a high density altitude location, and you'll kind of see what the results are of them, skimping out of that aircraft per se. And then, then we're actually going to learn how to see what affects density altitude, which is effectively your altitude, your pressure altitude, how high you are, how hot it is, and what the humidity level is. Basically, the hotter it is, the more humid it is, and the higher the altitude is, the greater your density altitude will be. And then I'm going to show you guys how to calculate both pressure altitude and density altitude using the chart. And we'll see if the wheels don't fall off the bus at that point. So go ahead and take a quick break. Go ahead and stretch your legs, grab something to eat or drink if you need it, and I'll see everybody back in 5 minutes.
You're going to use up every possible inch of runway available.
I recently saw this footage for the first time and it scared the hell out of me. It's actually like 4 years old and it made the rounds going viral in the aviation community back then. And I wondered, how could I have missed this? And then I realized it was because I had one of these around that time, so I was a little bit distracted from flying. But after things settled down in my life, I got back into it. So anyway, seeing this video actually inspired me to think about my personal minimums. Adding a margin to weather minimums is kind of an obvious one, but it's really important to think about margins with performance calculations as well.
Let me get my mojo. Alrighty.
So Chris Palmer from Angle of Attack was kind enough to share this footage with me so I could revive it and put a flight shop spin on it. The basic spin is, it's a high performance airplane, a turbo bonanza I believe. He's taken off from a very short runway, surrounded by trees at a high density altitude.
Alright, so let's do it.
Chris does an amazing job analyzing exactly what happens here, so I'm not going to get into those kind of details, but I'm going to provide links that you have to check out. For now, what I want to simply do is watch and react to it.
Airspeed is alive. Backed. Engine's in the green. Backed.
So clearly Chris knows he's facing a bit of a challenge as he starts this takeoff roll. But he knows his airplane, and he did his math, and he knows the numbers say it can be done, but the question is, will it be done? So after rotation here, he's committed, and you can see things aren't going as planned.
That's just a little scary. Little. Oh boy. Wow. Okay, things we are not doing again.
So that couldn't have been any closer. Let's just back it up and check this out. Look at those treetops. I mean, the wingtips are definitely below those. So he just squeaked it through that gap. He managed to instinctually turn just slightly left there to find that one gap that he had, and he made it through. And he fought the urge to pull back, which I think a lot of people would have done, and then he would have mushed into those trees for sure. So kudos for flying right on the edge, man. He got it out, but just barely.
Okay, Chris.
So in Chris's article where he breaks it down, you'll see a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking going on in the conversation thread.
I think we've learned our lesson. I actually thought we were kind of screwed there for a second. So did I.
So I think there's a saying that goes something like, experience is a difficult teacher because she gives the test first and the lesson afterward. And all lessons in aviation are not survivable. So the moral of the story here is, just because the performance calculations say you can do it doesn't mean you will be able to do it. I mean, you need to fly the airplane perfectly. You need ideal conditions exactly matching whatever the conditions were supposed to be in the charts. So the reality of it is, most airplanes are 10 plus years old that we're flying these days. And, you know, unless you're a multi-thousand hour pilot, you're not going to be flying perfectly. So the odds of you getting it done exactly as the book says are extremely low. And Chris is a very experienced pilot, and again, he does an amazing job breaking down everything that went on here, so I'm not going to get into the details. But at the end of the day, add a margin. So personally, I think I've kind of always ballparked 50%, but I'm going to officially say at this point, I'm going to add a 50% buffer to the performance numbers for my personal minimums for any takeoff calculations that I do going forward. So I'm just a private pilot doing my best to stay current and learn. I make these videos for self-analysis purposes. In this case, Chris was nice enough to share.
All right, buddy. So you can kind of see from Flight Chops. I'm sure most of you are aware of him. You can follow him on, Facebook and YouTube as primary locations in his website. But, density altitude is something that kills a lot of pilots even still, just because they're not as aware of it as they should be. But very simply, if we look at the definition of density altitude is pressure altitude corrected for non-standard temperature. And remember that as temperature and altitude increase, the air density decreases. So in a sense, it's the airplane or the altitude at which the airplane feels it's flying. And density altitude is always going to be given as a height above mean sea level. And there's three main factors that affect density altitude. Number one, it's your height. So how high up is the airport? If you're flying out of, let's say, Los Angeles International, which is closer to sea level, versus Big Bear, which is 6,000 feet up plus, that's going to be a higher density altitude immediately. It's also heat. The hotter it is, the higher the temperature, the higher the density altitude, and also humidity as well. The more humid it is, that's also going to have an effect. So very simply, if we were to look at aircraft performance, your aircraft, if it's going to be taking off at 100 feet MSL, very close to sea level, it's going to have a relatively short ground roll, and it's actually going to have pretty good performance. On a decent day, taking off at sea level on a 172, you're usually getting 1,000 feet per minute. Now, if we were to take off from a higher density altitude or even a higher altitude airport, let's say it's 5,000 feet, okay, we're going to actually have an increased ground roll, and our climb performance is going to degrade, and it's not going to be as good because we have a higher density altitude. And eventually, if the density altitude becomes so high that it's beyond the capability of the airplane, you may not be able to get off the ground, or you may get very low off the ground and not be able to climb out from the runway. So density altitude is something that you have the ability of calculating. And just to kind of put it into as an example here, a ballpark is if I told you that it's 40 degrees Celsius here in Camarillo, which is sea level. At sea level, and I told you it's 40 degrees Celsius, the density altitude, the approximate calculation is it's right around 4,500 feet, which means that even though my airplane is taking off from an airport that's still at sea level, the airplane's going to act or respond as if it's already 4,500 feet. So I'm not going to get a great climb rate on a very hot day out of the Camarillo area. So remember that heat also affects it as well. So, if you're getting closer to standard temperatures, right, which is 59 degrees Fahrenheit, and this one it's colder than standard, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and your ground roll is going to be fairly good, and you'll also have great takeoff performance and a decent climb rate. If you take off from that same airport and it's much hotter at 90 degrees, your ground roll is going to increase, and your takeoff or your climb rate is also going to decrease. And eventually, if it's so hot, the air is just going to become too thin, and the airplane is not going to be able to get off the ground or become airborne. A lot of times at these higher density altitude airports, I know Big Bear has this, you're usually going to see this density altitude sign right at the entrance of the runway. This is really just kind of putting in that final reminder to the pilot that, hey, this is the density altitude, so double check your aircraft performance. We can see here that on a standard day, the airport elevation is always 5,900 feet, but because of the temperature and other conditions, the density altitude for that day is 8,400 feet. So your airplane is basically going to be acting or performing as if it's already at 8,400 feet. And it's very wise of you to check your climb performance, and you can clearly see that it's going to be degraded, right? If we looked at the rate of climb that we looked at earlier, right? If you were to basically go to the far right column for the purposes of a Cessna, okay? So get rid of all these. And if I were to look at the hottest climb, the hottest day, 40 degrees Celsius at sea level, I am only climbing at 630 feet versus, it's much higher the colder it is. But if you look at it and I kind of go up to my pressure altitude is, let's say, 10,000 feet, my climb rate is only 175 feet per minute, which is actually fairly slow. And if there's an obstacle, power lines, trees, or anything else at the end of that runway, you may not be able to climb and effectively get over whatever that obstacle is, even if it's a couple miles away from the airport, okay? So density altitude is one of those special emphasis areas that the FAA wants us to talk about, and a couple of questions that relate to it, and then we'll look at how do we actually calculate it. Number one, what effect does high density altitude as compared to low density altitude have on the propeller efficiency and why? Is it A, efficiency is increased due to less surface friction on the propeller blades? B, efficiency is reduced because the propeller blades exert less force at high density altitudes than at low density altitudes? Or C, efficiency is reduced due to the increased force of the propeller in the thinner air? First third of the class in. All right, there's 50%. About 80% now. So Jerry's asking, the chart will give you the climb rate, but how do you know if it'll clear the obstacle or not? So very simply, you look on the sectional chart, and remember the sectional is going to have the obstacles in and around the airport, so you can figure out how tall it is and what your climb rate is. But always add a margin as well. So in the easy ways, if you're in a location where density altitude is an issue, number one, you can take off in the early morning when it's not as hot, or in the late evening when the sun goes down. That usually helps the situation. But it's also based upon the engine and the aircraft you're flying. So, a Cessna 150 with 100 horsepower is not going to do as well as a Piper Arrow, which is a 200 horsepower engine. So, all right, let's go and take a look at it. We got 5% with A, 75% with B, and the balance of the class with C. Majority does have it. It is going to be B. It is the efficiency is reduced because the propeller exerts less force at high density altitudes than at low density altitudes. Okay, so remember, the propeller produces thrust in proportion to the mass of air being accelerated through the rotating blades. And if the air is less dense, then the propeller efficiency is then decreased. Okay. All right, now comes the fun part where you guys get to calculate density altitude. So very simply, there's a cool little chart that the FAA is going to give you. It looks something like this. It'll be slightly different. And then when you calculate density altitude, we always go back to whatever the definition is. And remember that density altitude is pressure altitude corrected for non-standard temperature and or pressure. And the way that we operate these charts is it's really a two-part process. This over here is part one, okay? And part one is basically going to calculate your pressure altitude. It tells you what your pressure altitude is. Part two is going to calculate your density altitude. Okay, so be very careful when you read the question, and I've highlighted it. I'm going to give you one that's pressure altitude and one that is density altitude. But very simply, the way that we would calculate it is we need a couple pieces of information. Number one, if I told you that we were at, let's say, our altimeter setting or our baro setting, which is your altimeter setting, I'm going to make it easy on you guys. Let's say that it is 28.80, okay? And your temperature outside is going to be a nice 38 degrees Fahrenheit, or actually Celsius. We'll make it really hot. And let's see, then your pressure altitude, or let's just say your altitude in this case, which is your field elevation, is going to be at 5,000 feet. Okay. The first step is, if I asked you, what is your density altitude? That would be the question. I would use this information and I would start with part number 1, and I'd have to first figure out what my pressure altitude is. And very simply, they give us a conversion table or factor chart. Now, the ones I'm giving you are not going to be this easy, so just keep that in mind. So what I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at whatever the current altimeter setting is, and in this case, it's 28.80. And magically, look here, we've got 28.80, and it gives me the conversion factor of plus 1,000 feet. So the other way that I always do this, and you can ballpark this in the airplane, is, and I didn't really understand this until I was an airline pilot, but 29.92 inches of mercury is standard. Okay, so that's our standard value. Anything less than that, right? Any number that's less or greater, we're either going to add or subtract in order to get the difference. So very simply, if I've got a number that happens to be 28.92 inches of mercury, the way that I always remembered this is, as soon as you pass 18,000 feet, that's basically where we always bring our altimeter to standard value of 29.92 inches of mercury. And the way that I always think of it is, in order to get 28.92, is I basically have to take that dial and get this thing to go higher or to go up. I've got to basically increase this value to get to standard of 29.92. And thus, if the number is anything less than, then I'm basically adding it. So you're going to notice that anything less than 29.92, which is basically all of this stuff over here, you're going to add the altitude to get it corrected. Versus if I have 30.92, I actually have to decrease the dial to get down to standard, which means that anything greater than 29.92, I'm actually subtracting the number from it. So didn't really quite make sense to me until you start flying in class alpha. So now that I know what the conversion factor is, it's 1,053 feet. I'm going to add it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my altitude, and I'm going to add the conversion factor of 1,053, and that's going to give me my pressure altitude of 6,053 feet. So if the question just asked what the pressure altitude is, I would stop at this point because that's all I need to do. If the question is going to ask me what my density altitude is, now I need to use part number 2, or the second chart. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to first start off with looking at the outside air temperature along the horizontal axis, and I made it easy. It's basically 38 or 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And for simplicity's sake, all I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line straight up from the center just so we can see it. And then what I want to do is I need to find roughly about 6,000 feet, or where that pressure altitude is, and we can clearly see that we've got 6,000 here, and it is actually this line, so we know that it's going to be slightly higher or right around where that yellow is intersecting it. And all I'm going to do is, where it intersects, I'm going to take it pretty much straight across, go up just a little bit, and right here, this is where I read my density altitude. So here I'm going to do a little guesstimation, and I'm going to say my density altitude is approximately 10,000, I'll call it 300 feet-ish, okay? So what that tells me is that even though the field elevation of the airport is 5,000, my airplane is going to basically, it's going to have a horrible climb rate because I'm pretty much at the service ceiling, which means that I may not even be able to get off the ground depending on the aircraft that I'm flying, okay? So remember, you got step 1, you got step 2. The FAA is not going to make it this easy on you. What they're going to do is they're going to give you a altimeter setting that is going to be closer to like 28.82, okay? And you're going to realize there's no number in between, so you have to do a little, you have to kind of interpolate or interpolate the information to come up with that answer. All right, so with that, this first one is the FAA chart on the right. So you've got the green and white chart, that's your pressure altitude. And then part 2 is the larger chart that would give you your density altitude. So very simply here, determine the pressure altitude with an indicated altitude of 1,380 feet MSL and an altimeter setting of 28.22 at standard temperature. And you have your 3 potential answers there. Oops, wrong one. Sorry, guys. I did that again. I meant to give you this one. There you go. There's the right one. Interpolate. Thank you. Right, first couple answers coming in. Keep in mind, these are not going to be as easy as the example I gave you because the altimeter setting of 28.22 is not, there's not an exact altimeter setting. You only have 28.2 or 28.3. So if the chart is blurry in the lower right-hand corner, there is a little gearbox in the video. Make sure you can increase the call it the resolution or whatever that term is called. So right next to the volume button on the right hand side, there's a quality, and if you basically pull it up to 1080p, then that'll make the chart not blurry. That's also based upon your internet connection, or if you have a slower internet connection, you could try the 720p as well. All right, got the first third of the class in. Clear as mud, everybody? All right, we're at about 50%. Yeah, if you're on your iPhone, I would just hold off. It's gonna be too difficult if the screen is that small. Clear as pond water, perfect. Give you guys another 30 seconds and then I'm gonna start explaining here. All right, for those that are still trying to work on it, I'm going to keep it open. And for those that are done, I will walk you through this step by step. So number one, make sure you understand what it's asking you. In this case, it's pressure altitude. So remember that we don't need to use the blue chart on the left. We only need to use the green and white chart on the right-hand side. I will give you another one after this that you're going to use. You're going to first have to figure out pressure altitude, then you're going to use that blue chart on the left. So a couple pieces that we need to know. We have an indicated altitude of 1380 and we have a baro setting or an altimeter setting of 28.22. And like I said, this is where you're going to have to interpolate. And very simply, we only have the options here of these two, right? Which is 28.2 or 28.3. And keep in mind that there is, to go from 28.2 to 28.3, then we're dealing with basically tenths in between. So the easy way to kind of look at this is now that we have those two numbers, it's somewhere between 1630 and 1533. What you want to do is you want to figure out what is the difference between those two values. So in this step number one that I'm going to do is I'm going to take 1630 and I'm going to subtract 1533. and the difference between those two values is 97 feet. Okay, so the difference between 28.2 and 28.3 is a total of 97 feet. Now, the next thing that I need to do is I need to determine the amount of difference that needs to be subtracted from 28.20, or whatever the conversion factor is going to be. So in this case, very simply, is I'm going to take the 97 feet, and in this one, it is 0.22. So what that means to me is I'm basically going to multiply that 0.2, because it's 2/10 of the number. Okay, so 2.2 of that, got my calculator here, is going to equal 19.4 feet. Okay, so that's the reason why we're using that 0.2 there. So it's a 19.4 foot difference. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract the amount of difference from the amount shown for 28.2, because I'm going to do it that way. So I'm going to take 1630. So this is step 2. This is step 3. 1630. And I am going to add the value of 1380, okay, which is this amount right here, which is our indicated altitude. Everyone, you have questions with that so far? I want to make sure everyone's still up to part 2. Okay, you can use your electronic E6B. That's perfectly fine. So I just want to make sure we're all at step 2 here, which is the 19.4. We should all have 19.4 feet, which is the difference. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take the 1630 before we add it to the 1380. We're going to take the 1630, which is for 28.2, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to subtract 19.4 feet. Okay. And that is going to give me a total of 1610.6. Then I've got my pressure altitude. This is basically my conversion factor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this value and then I'm going to add it to 1380. Okay, so step number 4 is 1610.6. I'm going to add that to 1380.0 and do some quick math here. 2990.6. Okay. So when we're looking at this, now what we have to do is we have to figure out what is the closest potential answer to 2,990.6. Okay, and you'll notice that I did not use anything within the density altitude chart on the left. I'm just kind of doing it this way, which is giving me 2,990.6. And the correct answer with only 28% of the class is actually A, which is the closest one that we have. For majority of you guys that basically said 3,010 feet, it's probably because I'm not sure exactly how you guys did it. You guys obviously grabbed the wrong value there. Yeah, if you're multiplying it by 1.7, that's not going to work either. So we're basically looking at it as there's a 97 foot difference between these two values, right? Between 28.2 and 28.3. So the 97, you could do 97 times 0.1 and then figure out how many feet is 0.1 and add that. You could do it that way as well. So let's try another one here. And with this one, this is a density altitude problem. So you're going to have to first figure out the pressure altitude conversion on the right in the green and white chart, and then you're going to have to figure out what the pressure altitude is, and then use that information on the density altitude chart, the blue one, on the left-hand side there as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this one. Give you guys a few minutes, but remember this is density altitude. Yeah, you can't guess on these because the numbers are too close together. There's two different ways to calculate these. You could either add the value, the difference from the lower number, or you can subtract it from the higher number. I know these are a pain. All right, got the first couple answers coming in. Remember, you guys have to do the 2 steps here. You're going to use the chart on the right, the green and white chart, to figure out the pressure altitude conversion factor, the exact number. And then you're going to use that to figure out the pressure altitude, and then take that information to the density altitude chart that you guys see on the left-hand side of the screen. The lines are not moving. Sorry, guys. All right, you got about half the class in. Give you guys another minute, and then I'll start explaining. All right, so let's go ahead and go through this one. This is determine the density altitude. So we now know we have a 2-step process here. We have the altimeter setting of 29.25. And taking a look at 29.25, magically it does not appear on the conversion chart. So very simply, I'm going to also have to kind of figure out what the difference is here. So very simply, first thing I'm going to do is I found 29.2, which is 673 feet, and 29.3, which is 579 feet. Okay. So very simply, I will basically figure out what the difference is between those values. So I'm going to take 673 and subtract 579, and that is going to give me 94 feet. Okay, so it's a 94-foot difference between those two numbers. Now, what I know is that the 10th spot here is 0.5, so I'm going to take 94 feet and multiply that by 0.5, which is half of that value. And that is going to give me 47 feet, okay, because the altimeter setting is 29.25. So it's a halfway in between 29.2 and 29.3. So in this case, half of that value is 47 feet. And once again, you can do this one of 2 ways. I'm going to add it to 579 because we're going up, okay? So if I take 579 feet and I add 47 feet to that, that is going to give me 626 feet, which is going to be my conversion factor. And the reason why I'm doing it that way is, remember, the numbers are increasing. So 29.2 is 673 feet versus 29.3, which is a lower value of 579. So in this case, I'm just taking the 579, I'm adding 47 to it, and that gives me my conversion factor. From here, I can take the airport elevation of 5250, and I can add the conversion factor of 626 feet, and this is going to give me my pressure altitude, which is, quick math, 5,876 feet MSL. Okay, so that's step number 1. If anybody here, looking at the answers, some of you have said B, and B is actually incorrect in this case, just because of the fact that that would be your pressure altitude. So we know we need to go one more step beyond that. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the outside air temperature of 81 degrees, and I found 80 degrees here, so it's going to be slightly to the right of that line. And for simplicity's sake, I am just going to draw a line straight up right next to that one. Best I can here, something like that. It's probably even further over than I want it to be. And now I'm going to find, here's the 6,000 foot pressure line. So I know it's not going to be as high as there. It's going to be slightly lower than that value. But I will draw something that looks about right there. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is right here is going to be the density altitude. And you can see that it's pretty much very close. It's definitely above the 8 and it's between the 9. The most appropriate number is going to be 8,500 feet, which would be my density altitude. Okay. We had about 66% of the class get that. About 29, almost 30% got B, and a few people said A, which is a little bit completely off the mark there. Okay. So this one is a little bit different. We don't use 0.25. So 0.25 is a quarter instead of a half. We're asked that. All right, so good job, everybody. So practice with these. These are the ones that are more challenging, and you just have to kind of take it step by step. All right, before we've got a few more things that we need to kind of talk about real quick here. The first one is your takeoff definitions. And I'll try to have you guys out of here in the next 25 minutes or so. So with takeoff definitions, they are the following. You're going to have a ground roll, and your ground roll is basically from brakes, completely at brakes applied. You're basically not moving. You apply full power, and then once you actually rotate or lift off, the total distance from where you were at a full stop until you actually rotated is called your ground roll. Then you're going to have a total declare a 50-foot obstacle. And the 50-foot obstacle is an imaginary obstacle. All of your FAA books for all your airplanes will give you to clear a 50-foot obstacle or to not clear a 50-foot obstacle. So the more conservative method is to clear a 50-foot obstacle if you look at that information. And that is going to include your ground roll and the total distance covered over the ground in order to basically clear that 50-foot obstacle. In addition to that, you guys will also have different airspeeds when you guys are climbing out. So you're going to have to check your information inside of your airplane's either AFM or your POH. And you're going to have two different airspeeds. The first one is called VY. And VY is your best rate of climb. So best rate of climb is, remember, rate is over a given period of time. So this is going to give you the most altitude over a period of time. And in this case, if we look at the V speed card here, we actually have our VY, and this is actually 79 knots. Now, if we ever needed to clear a 50-foot obstacle, or if we had any type of terrain in front of us, we'd actually use VX, which is our best angle of climb. So it's actually going to give us the greatest amount of altitude over the shortest amount of distance, but you'll always notice that it is at a much slower airspeed than our VY. Traditionally, we'll do VX if it's a short field takeoff, and then we'll transition usually to VY as soon as we clear whatever that obstacle is, and then we'll continue climbing up from whatever that happens to be. Okay. All right, so we looked at the rate of climb chart. The rate of climb chart is a great chart to use. So if you have a specific density altitude, or if you're trying to basically figure out, can you climb above something, or this is actually taking into account density altitude, by the way. If you were to say that I'm taking off from an airport that's 6,000 feet and it is 40 degrees out, and then I can look at my climb rate of 355 feet per minute, you can kind of figure out, are you going to be able to climb out of the area that you're in? In addition to that, the rate of climb is really just kind of, it's just basic information for you to determine how well your aircraft is actually going to perform under certain conditions. In addition to that, you'll be using rate of climb charts far more frequently if you're an instrument pilot, because those charts will actually dictate, what is the minimum rate of climb for certain procedures out there. Okay. The next thing we're going to look at is a takeoff distance chart. So a takeoff distance chart, these are the ones that people don't like with all these color combinations. So the first thing that I can show you guys is very simply, these are broken into 4 different areas. And the way that we work these charts is we always start on the left-hand side and we go all the way to the right-hand side. So you're going to be given a certain amount of information, and step number 1 is always going to be using the outside air temperature. That's really what the first part of it is the outside air temperature and the pressure altitude. Then we figure out whatever the weight of the aircraft is. Then we look at a wind component, whether we have a headwind or a tailwind. And then we basically look at, are we going to clear or do we need to clear a 50-foot obstacle? And every single time you guys are done calculating, you're going to notice that there is a reference line that is basically a vertical line that separates each one of these, right? So these are your reference lines right there. And what you're supposed to do is you're basically supposed to calculate the first part, and then you're supposed to, take that line and go to the reference line straight over, and then you would then calculate the second part, okay? So I'll show you guys how to do these in 1 second. So very simply, these guidelines in terms of what you're supposed to do is if you make it to a reference line right here, what you do is you do not follow the next line down. So what I don't do is I don't go down here and then follow that line down. I'm basically paralleling these lines right here, and then I go down to the next guidance line, okay? Without all those wonderful colored lines, what you're actually doing is this. I'm figuring out what the outside air temperature is, and then I'm going to go to the pressure altitude. Once I figure out where that's located, I'm going to go straight across to my reference line. Then I'm going to follow the guideline down to my weight. In this case, it's 2,800 pounds. And once I get to that weight, then I'm going to follow it straight across. And then if there's a wind component, you'll either have a headwind or a tailwind or nothing. Then you'll basically follow those lines as well. Okay, they're not necessarily going to be colored lines, so I'll show you in this example right here. Okay, so let's look at this example, and there's always an example problem or an example loading problem. In this case, it's this green one at the top here. So let's use this since it's already happens to be in here. And the first couple pieces of information is it is 25 degrees Celsius and about 3965 on the pressure altitude. So what we do is we figure out where 25 degrees Celsius is, which is right here. And what we would do is we're going to basically draw a line straight up, and wherever it intersects the roughly almost the 4,000 foot pressure line, which is this line right here, okay, it's this one that goes straight across. From that point, then I am basically going to draw a line straight across to my reference line. And then I'm going to stop at that point. So just draw it straight across to the reference line. And now what I need to do is this is the weight of the aircraft. Okay, so the weight or the takeoff weight of my aircraft is 2,814 pounds. So what I'm going to do is I found 2,800 pounds, and it would be slightly to the left of that. So once again, I'm going to draw a line straight up so I can use that as a reference. And this is where we follow that pink line down. We don't, we're not going down like this. We are actually just using it as a guideline, and we are basically going to parallel that like that. And then once we get to 2,814 pounds, from that point, then we basically take this line straight across again. Okay, we're going to take it straight across until we get to our next reference line, which is here. And then we have our wind component. If it's a tailwind, the numbers are we're gonna follow that line up. If it's a headwind, they're gonna go down. Traditionally, with a headwind, we're gonna actually use less runway, and if we're with a tailwind, we're gonna use more runway. In this case, we have a headwind of 9 knots. Okay, so for simplicity's sake, I'm gonna draw a line. Here's the 10. I'm gonna draw a line roughly from 9 knots straight up, so we could see it. Okay, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna parallel that green line down. Because it's a headwind, the headwinds are going down, so I'm going to follow that down. And then once it gets my reference line, I'm just going to draw it straight across. Now here's the question is, do I need to clear a 50-foot obstacle or do I not? If I don't need to clear a 50-foot obstacle, there's nothing that I do. I just follow that line across, and then this is the amount of feet I'm going to use in terms of basically my ground roll. Okay, if I needed to clear a 50-foot obstacle, what I would do is I would parallel one of these lines, basically the pink line, and whatever that value is, which is about 1,700 feet here, that's the distance to clear a 50-foot obstacle. Okay. How in the world do you draw such straight lines? I'm using a straight edge, so that's how. All right, so I want to give you guys an opportunity to attempt to do this yourself. Very simply, here is the question. They're not going to be as color coded as what you guys have, but here's the question. And you're going to have the following information. Okay, so going back to the question, determine the approximate ground roll distance required for takeoff, the ground roll distance. You have an outside air temperature of 95 degrees Fahrenheit, a pressure altitude of 2,000 feet, a takeoff weight of 2,500 feet, a headwind component of 20 knots, and we're only looking for the ground roll. We're not looking for clearing a 50-foot obstacle in this example. And your answer potentials are 650 feet, 850 feet, or 1,000 feet. Remember, we start on the far left-hand side of the chart and we work through each one. The red lines that you guys see on there is for the example problem. So if you want to cross-reference the example problem, that is this one in the upper left-hand corner. Well, that's you know, that's the reason why some people prefer Cessnas over Pipers, just because the Pipers have these more complicated charts and the Cessnas are a little bit easier to use. Easy peasy. First couple answers rolling in. You guys are all scattered across the board though. And give me about 15 more minutes and I'll try to get you guys out of here about 5 minutes past the hour. For those that have to drop off, I understand the recording will be posted at the end of class. All right, got the first third of the class in. All right, there's about 50% of the class in. Cannot use the CX3 for these. That you're gonna have to use the manufacturer charts. And you guys are pretty much evenly split, about 30, a little bit over 30% with each one of the potential answers here, 650, 850, or 1,000. Remember, going back to the original test question, what is the approximate ground roll distance required for takeoff? What is the approximate ground roll distance required for takeoff? Scott, this will be posted usually within about an hour and a half after the class ends. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in so we can stay on time here. So first thing I'm going to look at is my pressure altitude of 2,000, and I'm looking for an outside air temperature of 95 degrees. What you're going to notice is that the first line right here is for Celsius, so I'm going to reference the second line for Fahrenheit, and I'm going to find approximately 95 degrees. So this is 90, that's 100, so I know it's right in between those right there. And I am going to just draw a line straight up. That way we can kind of see where that's going to fall in. Okay, so that's roughly 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out where 2,000 feet is. And very simply, this is the pressure line for 2,000, which is this one right there. So I'm going to see where that intersects with my red line, and I'm going to draw basically straight across to the reference line. That's even a little bit high. Make sure that you get these exactly on. Digitally is a little bit harder, but try to get these exactly on if you can. So now that I'm at my reference line, it's asking me what is the weight or the takeoff weight of this aircraft. In this case, it's 2,500 pounds. What I'm going to do is here's 2,400, here's 2,500, and 2,600. For this purpose, for the class, I'm just going to draw the entire 2,500 so we can clearly see it, and that is 2,500 pounds. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow that reference, that guideline down, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to just follow it like that. Okay, what I want to do is I basically want to parallel it, so it should look, hopefully, something like, do this correctly, should look something like that. So you can see that I'm clearly paralleling that line until I get to 2,500 pounds. Once I'm at 2,500 pounds, then I'm going to take that line and basically go straight across to the reference line. And then from here, it's asking me what is my wind component. In this case, I have a headwind of 20 knots. So here's 20 knots right here. And I'm just going to draw a line straight through that so that way we can look at that clearly. Okay, so there's 20 knots of headwind. And from this point, I'm pretty much right on that headwind line. The dashed line is the tailwind, so I'm not going to follow it up. I'm actually going to follow it down. And in this case, I am pretty much just going to follow that to a T all the way down there. See that closer? Okay. And then once I get to my line, once again, it is going to be a straight shot across. Okay, and that is the reference line right there as well. Okay, now very simply, if I need to clear a 50-foot obstacle, all I'm going to do is basically from the reference line, follow this up, and then whatever this value is right there, that is to clear a 50-foot obstacle, and this value right there is going to be your ground roll. Okay, so taking a look at the potential answer choices, I'm going to go ahead and call it right there. We got 29% with A, 35% with B, and another 35% with C. Your best answer when we're looking at this is going to be about 650 feet. Okay, so here's the 500. There's a 600 right there. And the correct answer is 650. 850 would be slightly higher. If I move my circle right there, 850 is somewhere over here. And if anyone said 1,000 or above 1,000, then you'll notice that that's not even close. So this is the reason why you have to be very specific with where your lines are. Okay, so once again, you basically follow the your outside air temperature to your pressure altitude. You take that across the reference line. You parallel the guidelines to your actual weight. Once you get to the weight, you just draw the line straight across. You determine if it's a headwind or a tailwind. In this case, it's a headwind of 20 knots. Once I get to that 20 knot line, I take it straight across. If it is just the ground roll, which is what the question's asking, I take it straight across. If it was a clear a 50-foot obstacle, that's when I'm going to follow that guideline up. Okay. Yeah, it should be a little bit further over. You guys are right. It should be right here. So, but it is still going to be correct if you guys look at it. Anyways, that is going to be the correct answer, but you guys are correct. It is 2,500, which is here. You'll see that that is not going to change it that much. I take this across just like that. It's basically going to bring up my line ever so slightly. So instead of being perfectly on the black line, good call, good catch, guys. You'll see it will look something like, move these real quick, straight across again. And actually I can take it straight from there. Something like that. It should be lower though, the way it should come out. But the correct answer is 650. Okay, correct answer is 650 for the ground roll. All right. I got to move on real quick here. We'll talk about crosswinds here in a few minutes. The next chart we want to talk about is time, fuel, and distance. And time, fuel, and distance is pretty simple. We're going to cover it more on Wednesday, but if I'm going to be taking off from ABC Airport and I want to climb to 5,000 feet, the question is that from the point when I take off from the airport to my actual altitude, how much time is it going to take? How much fuel am I going to use? And what is the distance covered? to basically get to whatever this waypoint is. We'll call this waypoint A. So very simply, the time, fuel, and distance is usually going to be a max gross takeoff weight. So this is a Cessna 172. And if I were to look at 5,000 feet, all I would do is go across. This would be my climb speed. It would take me 8 minutes. I would use 1.8 gallons of gas, and I'm going to basically go 11 nautical miles to go from my takeoff until I get to 5,000. You always want to read the notes, though. In this case, it is telling you to add 1.1 gallons of fuel for engine start, taxi, and takeoff. So I would want to add 1.1 gallons in addition to the 1.8 gallons of fuel used for the climb. You'll also notice that the mixture is leaned above 3,000 feet, and I would also have to increase these values for every 10 degrees Celsius above the standard temperature it is. And these are all based off of a 0 wind condition. Okay. Pretty much everybody, we're going to calculate these tomorrow. This is called TOC, top of climb. And then we're also going to calculate what is called TOD, which is top of descent. And this is basically calculating the same thing, but at what point are you going to descend for the airport as well. The last one I want to cover for tonight, since we're running out of time, we'll cover anything that we missed moving forward on Wednesday here, is going to be your cruise performance information. So once you're actually up at altitude, you will start having to figure out what is going to be the cruise performance. And this is going to be very simple. The first thing that you're going to look at is you're going to see that there's really 3 different areas. We've got standard temperatures, we have ISA plus 20, and we have ISA minus 20. Okay, so this is where you're going to have to figure out, is it standard temperature or is it not standard temperature? So where we find this information is, number one, you could look at your winds aloft, and very simply, if your winds aloft told you that, let's assume we're going to fly at 4,000 feet, and your winds aloft data was telling you that the temperature is 20 degrees Celsius, okay, which is actually going to be fairly warm. You can kind of look at it this way. On a standard day at sea level, it should be 15 degrees Celsius, okay? This is sea level. Remember, kind of like what I did before, you've got 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, 3,000, 4,000, okay? Based on the standard lapse rate, we should get 2 degrees colder per 1,000 feet. So on a standard day, 15 degrees Celsius, at 1,000 feet, it should be 13 degrees, and then at 2,000 feet, it should be 11 degrees, okay? So all you're going to do is figure out how much colder is it supposed to be at 4,000 feet, okay? And you can already see that it is much, much warmer than a standard day. If it was a standard day, what I would do is 15, 13, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. It should be on a standard conditions, 7 degrees Celsius. So if the winds aloft data was telling me at 4,000 feet that it was 70 degrees Celsius, I would use basically the chart in the center, which is standard day information. Because we're dealing with much warmer temperatures, we're almost about 13 degrees over standard, then I would use ISA plus 20 because that is for warmer temperatures, and that's basically where I would start off from. From that point, what I would do is I would look at the altitude that I intend on cruising at, and these are basically my cruise power settings. This is what I would want to set up for, best performance. And I'd look at your 4,000 feet, and what I would do is I'd come all the way over and I would look at this line right here. And that line right there would give me some basic information. It would give me how much fuel I'm burning, which is 11.5 gallons per hour. And it gives me my cruise speed of either 159 knots, which is my true airspeed, or miles per hour, which is 183 miles per hour. And I would use that for my planning purposes as well. Okay. So what I want you guys to do is I want to give you guys an opportunity before we leave. This last question here is right here. And figure 35, I'm going to make it a little bit easy for you, but approximately what true airspeed should a pilot expect with full throttle at 10,500 feet with a temperature of 36 degrees above standard? This is what figure 35 looks like. So they're already telling you what the ISA, what the temperature is. So very simply, the one in the center is standard. The one on the far left is ISA minus 20 degrees Celsius or minus 36. And the one on the right is ISA plus 20 or plus 36 degrees. So they're already telling you in this step, please use 36 degrees above standard. So I've kind of simplified it here for you. So based upon that, here are your three potential answers. You've got 190 knots, 159 knots, or 165 knots. What are you lost on, Brian? So what we use these charts for is basically to figure out the best performance depending on our conditions once we're actually at the appropriate altitude. So a chart like this, for example, this will tell us what our fuel burn is, or it will also give us our cruise speed, our true airspeed, which is what we're going to use for flight planning purposes. So we're going to go through exactly what numbers and where to find the same information on Wednesday. So don't worry, we're going to go through these charts in more detail, but more on the practical side as well. All right, we've got about 50% of the class in. How accurate are all these calculations? So keep in mind, these are based off of brand new airplanes, brand new engines, and some guy or gal, some test pilot that has, 10,000 plus hours, and, they're calculating this stuff. So take it with a grain of salt, especially just like they said in the video, most of these aircraft are, 15, 20 years old. And then also you don't have the experience level. So what I usually tell private pilot students is add, not to this, but to your performance information like takeoff distance or landing distance, add 50% to whatever that value is. These numbers here are pretty accurate in terms of fuel flow and your true airspeed. That's what we're going to be basing our calculations off of for our flight planning. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this one, and then you guys are out of here. So very simply, we have a couple pieces of information. We know we're going to be at 10,500. They've already told us to use the plus 36 degree section of the chart, so we know that. Magically, you guys will notice that 10,500 does not exist. So we have two different values here. And the number one mistake that I usually see people make is they immediately go over here, and a lot of people will say 191. Keep in mind that your only answer choices are in knots, so you should not be looking at anything in the mile per hour column, which is the far right one. Should be looking to the one second to the right, which is the knots column. And if you look at the knots column, just to kind of put it in perspective here, 190 knots is nowhere, it's not even a potential anywhere under knots. So I can immediately rule that one out, okay? The other two that I've got is I've got 159 knots, or I've got 165 knots, which is sitting right there, okay? 159 knots is tied to 4,000 feet, so that's going to be too slow. That's not going to work. If I look right here and kind of drag that over for what should be 165 knots in between the two, you'll notice that they pretty much sit perfectly between 10,000 and 12,000. So C is the appropriate answer there. That's the number one mistake that we see. We have about 16% of the class that got A, 5% with B, and 78% majority of the class got it right with C. Okay? And then the last two basically deal with pressure. And pressure is either rising rapidly or it's falling rapidly, which would basically tell you that there's probably a front that's moving in. And the easy one to remember is the bottom one here, which is pressure. FR, which is falling rapidly, and the opposite one is SR. They should have just used RR, but pressure is rising rapidly as the SR version of that. Okay, so that is what we're going to be looking at when we come back on Monday. And then most of the codification that you guys see here is going to extend into what we're going to take a look at for our TAFs as well. So TAFs are basically a forecast instead of the weather, the current weather. A TAF is basically a forecast over either a 24 or 30-hour period using kind of the same terminology. And we'll go ahead and take a look at that on Monday. All right, everybody. So that basically wraps up lesson number 10 for today. So as I stated at the beginning of class, we didn't really quite get as far along as I wanted to today, but that's perfectly fine. We will pick up the weight and balance, which is basically about 30 to 40-minute discussion on our next class period for class number 11 on flight planning. As a reminder, please make sure that you have, if you have a sectional available, we'll be teaching out of the Los Angeles sectional. Doesn't mean you have to have that. Please make sure you have your E6B and your aviation plotter available in hand, so that way you can follow along. And that will really kind of, it is kind of a hands-on course. Even if you don't have the LA sectional, grab whatever sectional you have, so that way you can see how to plot the course and actually calculate the numbers as we go through. It's going to be kind of a busy day for our next lesson. And then just keep in mind that we're going to kind of get going right out of the gate. We don't have too much time. With that, if there was any questions that we were unable to answer, remember the moderators will be sticking around to answer any last minute questions. And also if there's something that we could get to, or maybe you had a question that kind of you thought about after class, remember you have either the Facebook group, you can post something. You can also throw it in Ask a CFI, where we answer those a couple times per day. In addition to that, if you have a technical question, remember you can use the help desk. It's in the lower right-hand corner. But other than that, we'll see everybody later. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great night and take care. I'll see you next time.